Converted man here. What was that? I don't know. That was a horrible intro. Let's try that again. Converted man. That's better. All right. I got Zach from Adherent Apologetics, and you're one of two. There's another apologist that uses your channel sometimes. And it's confusing. I never know who I'm talking to. So welcome to this, and thanks for coming. We did a debate once. You are my otherwise worthy frenemy nemesis. I don't know. I love to thumb down and leave my skeptical, jaded comment on your videos and be irritated that you won't respond to anything I do. So, anyways, you're a Christian. But let's talk a little bit about that first. Who is the other half on your channel, by the way? I can't remember his name.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me on, Dan. It'll be fun to talk with you. My name's Zach. I run Adherent Apologetics. Carl is who you are thinking of.
Carl.
He's not really a part of it anymore. He'll guest from time to time, but it's mostly just me now that kind of runs the channel. So I'm Zach. I have a YouTube channel and podcast called Adherent Apologetics. We just talk with mostly Christians, but also skeptics about like big questions related to like philosophy, biblical studies, all kinds of fun stuff. Like for example, today I'm talking with an atheist about quantum mechanics and consciousness. So you just never know what's coming up, but that's a little bit about me. Thanks for having me on, Dan.
Yeah. So now, how long did you grow up in a Christian household? Also, what like denomination are you, if any? And let's get into the kind of the nitty gritty of that, if you could.
Sure. My background. So, I grew up in a Christian household. Like that's a part of my life. But I wouldn't say I became a Christian until I was about maybe like 18. So I grew up, we went to a couple different churches. The first church until I was about 7, I believe, was non-denominational. Then we went to like Assemblies of God, and then we kind of didn't go to church for a little bit. And now my family back home, they're part of the Christian Missionary Alliance. So we've been around a little bit, but mostly Protestant. So that's the church background. My story in terms of like faith and such, grew up in a Christian household. So I always like believed in God. Because it's just kind of like part of it's what I grew up in. Part of it is what I think is just an intuitive belief, is a belief in God. You can see it across all cultures, but we can talk about that if you want. So I grew up believing in God. And then about after my sophomore year of high school, had a friend pass away in a car crash. And it kind of made me think about like these big questions, like, is he in heaven? Is there a heaven? Is there a God? I just started really questioning and thinking about these big questions, looked at a lot of different people, and like kind of like I started to first be introduced to apologetics through that. And then about a year later, give or take, I started to really think that this Christianity stuff was really true. I became a Christian, and a little bit later I started hearing apologetics, and now I'm talking to the lovely Dan, the deconverted man. So that's a little bit about my story.
This is the peak. It's all downhill from here. Actually, this is the bottom, and it's all uphill from this. Yeah. So yeah, I was going to say about apologetics, because I had gotten into that actually towards the end of my Christianity. So what really fascinated you about that? Was it just that this is what do you view it as? Like, what is, obviously it means to give a defensive, but what do you view what you do? What is it that you're attempting to do? Are you trying to defend the faith? Are you trying to convert people? Are you trying, what is it that the mechanics of apologetics from your view?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'll start with just apologetics, and then I'll kind of go into like me and my kind of view. I think apologetics, you define it well, it's just a defense of the faith. It's defending something. So Christian apologetics is defending Christianity, like the reasons to believe in Christianity, and also defending attacks from skeptics and why like you shouldn't be a Christian. So I think that's like the basis of apologetics. In terms of like me and my personal mission, like obviously like I'm a Christian, I'm an apologist to some degree. Like I don't have professional training, but I do hope to defend Christianity, make it seem like it really is true, because I believe it is true. Not just because I want it to be, because I really think it is true. And then my personal mission, especially with Adherent Apologetics, is just to discover truth. So I talk with mostly Christians because it's an apologetics channel, but I also want to talk with like skeptics. I love talking with people like you, Dan, and we're talking like, for example, with an atheist later today, this afternoon, about like quantum mechanics and consciousness. Like, what the heck is going on there? It's so weird. And just like, what's the truth about reality? So I think if you want to summarize like my mission as a whole, as an apologist running this channel, it's just to discover truth about reality. And as a Christian, it's obviously to hopefully bring people to know Christ and the fellowship and the beauty in that. So it's a little bit about like me and my mission.
Yeah, well, I build myself as an amateur logician, and so I analyze these arguments, and it seems the recurring motif, it seems to be, is getting anybody that's a believer to admit to even one logical fallacy in any given argument. Are you able to admit, let's say, pick an argument out of the hat and say, okay, here's the fallacy that this argument has, or is it that these arguments, there are no fallacies, you just have to look at it in a certain way? What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think arguments as a whole, there's lots of fallacious arguments. I would definitely disagree with you that like all arguments for God are fallacious. I think there's a lot of them where we can get to premises where it's like, maybe this is true, maybe this is not. We don't really know, but it's not fallacious. Like, for example, the Kalam, you can debate whether it's true or not. I don't think it's fallacious. I just saw you roll your eyes. So I don't think it, like, for example, I think a lot of arguments we can debate, like we can debate premise 2 of the Kalam, but it still wouldn't make it fallacious, because the fallacious, you have to prove something like maybe like begging the question. So if I brought an argument where it was like, if 1 + 1 = 2, then God exists. 1 + 1 = 2, therefore God exists. The argument would be sound because the form, it'd be like modus ponens, but then premise 1 would be fallacious because I'm just begging the question, like, what does 1 + 1 = 2 have to do with God existing? So I definitely agree that there are some arguments that are fallacious for God's existence. I just don't think all of them are. And if we want to get into the nitty gritties of one or two, I'm up for that. So I'd be very hesitant to say off the bat about anything that all of X are just fallacious.
I didn't say that. It's just like, would you be able to say, oh yeah, okay, that there's a fallacy and let's fix this argument or whatever? Because it has seemed to be that it's pulling teeth sometimes to just get somebody be like, look, no, this is, and you go at it and you're like, look at it, and you explain it and they go, well, you just, you gotta look at it this way. I'm like, no, because that's not how logic functions. And by the way, it's valid, not sound. Soundness is if it has no fallacies and it's corrective. Or did I do it backwards again? I'm gonna double check myself there.
Yeah, I mean,
but it's easy to get those two switched around. But at any rate, the skeptic, the atheist, agnostic, whatever, the non-believer in any of the gods that are available out there, typically what I've seen, broadly speaking, is asking for a type of evidence that the apologist or theist generally just doesn't seem to have access to. And I feel like there's some sort of disconnect going on where it almost seems like we're talking past each other sometimes, where it's like, I'm asking for this, and instead they'll say, well, but that's not the only type of evidence, yada yada, and they'll go off into this tangent. It's like, yeah, but let's first deal with the fact that we don't have this type of evidence. So usually for, the skeptic, they'll be like, I want empirical, observable evidence or repeatable tests. And these things seem to be lacking for the phenomenon directly of God or spirit, soul, angels, afterlives, whatever, these supernatural or paranormal phenomenon, that they lack these things that you would find almost common in other things. Do you see that as an actual problem, or is it just, well, you're making a category, or of course I've heard that before, but what do you make of, are we lacking these things? And if so, why does it seem like we miss each other when we bring that up and say, well, what about this? Where's the, I have a white thing. Here's a white thing. Why can't I just do that and say, here's God? I can't do that.
Yeah. There's a lot of different directions we can go with this question, because this is a lot of fun. And we see this a lot. Like, where's the empirical evidence for God? I understand that. I remember when we did our debate, we talked about that a little bit. And a lot of skeptics online out here, like, we need this we need a verification or a demonstration that God exists. And that's kind of like what we need. And there's a few different directions we can go here. So I'll just start with this. I don't think that an empirical demonstration is even what we'd expect, or in terms of like what's like necessary to believe that God exists. So just to help, like, let's talk about like what do we use empirical tests for? I think we use it for scientific phenomena. If you look at like we want to test like how protons work when they collide or something, we get a microscope. It's predictable. They obey like the laws of physics or something, whatever the deeper laws are. I'm not anything close to a physicist.
Yeah.
I hope I'm not misrepresenting physics. But when we look at like an empirical experiment, we're dealing with empirical phenomena that have mass, that have density, they're material, things like that. At least the God I'm arguing for, like a theistic God, is something that's immaterial, it's spaceless, and maybe initially timeless. It's a free agent. So I don't think we're going to expect those same kind of like tests to work for that God, because it's just not in the same category. Like for example, if I say the Grand Canyon exists, it's a physical thing, we can go check it out. I'm not saying that God is something like the Grand Canyon. We can just go walk over to Arizona and be like, oh, there it is, see, it's done.
Right.
So,
But you know, here it is, and again, it's like where I'm saying, well, do we have X? And you're saying, well, but there's all this, and it's like, yeah, okay, but we haven't answered the question. Do we have this?
Yeah.
So do we have the empirical evidence of phenomenon X, where X is, you know, God or afterlife or whatever? So let's just answer that question honestly, and then answer the question of, can we test X, whatever X might be? So with that, do you think that answer is no in regards to any of the supernatural or paranormal or whatever realm that we're speaking of? Because I wanted to include paranormal, because I don't know, you know, there's, you know, people that claim all sorts of extrasensory powers and stuff like this, so can't leave that off the table. So do we have empirical evidence of the phenomenon, let's say God? Yes or no? Can we test it? Yes or no? And then it's like, okay, well, yeah, we know that there's other things that we could look at or whatever, but it's just like a simple answer to what seems like a simple question.
Yeah. I would tend to think, I mean, I'm not completely committed to this position, but I would tend to think that we do have good empirical reason to believe that God exists. Not empirical proof, like kind of like what you're suggesting, where it's like, or maybe not, I hope I'm not misrepresenting you, but like we have like, this is it, case closed, go home, we're done here, God exists. But I think we do have good empirical reason to believe that God exists. I remember I did a debate over the summer with Randolph Richardson, not over the summer, over the winter. And I brought forth a couple of studies that seemed to show that prayer had some efficiency in it, and it was double-blind studies. So I was like, okay, well, maybe there's something going on here. And if God doesn't exist, can I finish for a second? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
You know, you're fine. Don't worry about it. Because there's just 2 points I want to make. You're good. This is the first one. So it seems like in a couple of these studies, it seems like there's some legs to the idea that there really is, in studies at least, some evidence that there is some sort of like being beyond pure like metaphysical naturalism. And it seems like in these studies. The second point I want to bring up is I think religious experience. I don't think it's a good argument for like Christian theism, but I think it's a good reason to believe in theism, that there is a God. If you look at it over time across all cultures, from all denominations and all ideas, there's very constantly the idea that there is a God or gods. Like these experiences are very common to so many people. I mean, I've had them, and I don't think they prove God exists, but I think they do provide some legs to the idea that there really might be a God, because people all across all time from all different areas have claimed to believe that, yeah, there is something more to reality than just the natural, and that there really is a God. So I think, yeah, for those two reasons, I think that there might be good reason to believe that there is some sort of empirical legs to the idea that God exists.
Right. So, you know, one of those was an answer to the testing part. Sound like that there might be some room for testing, say, in regards to prayer studies. And then the other one, but I think that because I want to make sure that you're understanding the question I'm proposing, which is like, okay, visible, empirically and verifiable. So I can visualize it either now. Simple thing, you know, I've got this little green guy. Here he is. okay, you saw that I have a green guy now. Yes, okay, we could get into maybe it was a special effect or Photoshop, yada yada. But then we would gain some burden to show that that's the case. But at least you were able to see it. So with these phenomenon, whether it be God or the afterlife or a soul or whatever, there's nothing to point to and say there it is, right? Is that correct? Or
I mean, I can't like point right there and be like, oh, there's God right there.
yeah,
Case
right,
closed.
exactly. It's
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
yeah,
I
like
would
the
agree
moon.
with
Here's
that.
the moon out there, right?
Mhm.
But of course, now, even though the moon's clearly evident, there are people that believe weird things about the moon. So even if God was up there and evident, there would still be a few fringe people that had all sorts of weird ideas about it, I'm sure. That's just the nature of humanity for whatever reason.
Right.
But
No,
yeah, go ahead.
What I think is helpful to bring up here is the idea of how do we connect our experiences to like what's real with reality. And I think this is helpful. I've been reading about this a little bit. I'm not anywhere close to an expert on it, but I was reading, I think his name's like Kai Kwan or something, because he did the argument from religious experience in the Black Hole Companion to Natural Theology. And what he talks about is really interesting. So it fits really well with kind of what we're talking about here, Dan. And it's the idea of, let's just say that we have these experiences of the natural world. Like I see this pen right in front of me, right? How do I know this pen is real? How do I know that it's not an illusion? Well, I trust my senses on this. I trust that like my eyes are reliable, that my brain's reliable, that can really perceive that this pen is really right in front of me, right? Okay. How do I know my senses are reliable? That's a really interesting question. And I think it's a properly basic belief. It could just be that we're in the matrix and this pen actually isn't real. It's an illusion. But I do have this properly basic belief that I can trust my sensory experiences. I can't prove it like with absolute certainty. It could be the matrix. But I do have this basic belief that the pen really does exist. And I think the same thing could be said similarly to religious experiences, where I think that people's experiences can also just be a properly basic belief. So that's a little bit more on like what we were talking about here, and just like empiricals and stuff.
Right. Because this is, to me, it's the fundamental breaking off point where I go, this is really an argument about epistemology when it gets to its core of both of the people, the skeptic, the theist, whatever, that it's like, I'm using this system and the other person say, no, you need to use this system. I was like, no, look, just at least admit that you don't have this. Well, but we kind of no. But you never get off the initial starting point seems to be so difficult for both of you to start it and say, okay, look, there's no empirical evidence. You can't see it. Are you happy now? Okay, yeah, no, I'm not happy, but at least we agreed on that, and then we move on. Yeah, of course we're getting into the territory of I can never pronounce the word sophism,
Soliphism, I believe.
Soliphism, there it is. Thank you. Where I mean, at some level, I can't trust my senses because I know that they can be fooled, or they can wear out, or they can degrade. So, but the benefit there is, when you hold up the pen, and I've got a pen, I can, I prefer to hold up weird things that I have like this,
Fair enough.
But at any rate, we can both then say, okay, let's make sure that that you see what I see, and so we can, we could describe that to somebody else. We could write it down. We could document it, yada yada yada, and so go, okay. All right, so we came together, we looked at it, we compared it because we had the double blind thing going on and all this, and we go, okay, yeah, you can see what I see, or close enough. And of course we have, you could go to the eye doctor and make sure that your vision is good and all this, because we know that it fades and it can be wrong, and memory also is not reliable. That I can't remember what the bleep I ate last week or yesterday. I can't even remember. I think I ate a sandwich today. That's all I can remember, though. I don't remember how many times I went to the bathroom. Your brain just doesn't remember things like that. It's just not relevant for you to remember, so your brain forgets it. So with all of that, that's why we have invented the philosophy of science, where we say, okay, let's try to get out of that bubble of depending solely on our human observations. Yes, we still have to kind of do that, but we're going to document it. We're going to try to eliminate our human biases as best as we can. And when it comes to visualizing the phenomenon of the supernatural or the mystical, the magical, the paranormal, or whatever we want to label it, and even the label can be a problem too, that we simply, there doesn't appear to be a way to demonstrate it in that way. Is that something we have a disagreement on, or do you kind of see where I'm coming from on that?
I think I kind of get it. I'm trying to map it out exactly. I would go back to the idea that, like, even with like the empirical sciences, we need to connect our sensory experiences to reality. We almost have to use circular reasoning. Like I like Descartes, like I think therefore I am, because that's a good spot. But in terms of like showing that there really is an external world, we would have to just make this like properly basic belief, trust.
Yeah, right.
Because I think about it.
Yes, we don't have a choice.
Yeah, because I think about it, like if I'm going to say, okay, my senses are, if I'm trying to prove that my senses are reliable, here's kind of like how I would, like, without apps, like I could, to prove that I'm not in the matrix, I kind of have to say, okay, my senses, I think therefore I am, and I can sense things, I can see things, they exist in reality. Okay. And I can go from those senses to tests. And it's like we have these like empirical tests where like it seems like my senses are reliable because I'm picking up food and I'm eating it and it's helping my body, or I can see the pen and I can control it. So it seems like these things work and I can interact with reality. But how do I know that I'm interacting with reality? Well, through my senses, through my touch, oh my gosh, I can't speak. My touch, my taste, my sight. So it seems like if we're going to try to prove that we're not in the matrix, we'd have to use circular reasoning. All that to say is that we do have these like properly basic beliefs about reality,
right. No,
these basic experiences that we trust.
Yeah, no, I agree that we have to start with reality is real. We simply assert that and kind of move on. I mean, the debate of that is kind of like, I go, it's a mental exercise. You do it once and that's good enough for me, because really the burden is on proving we are in the Truman Show or the Matrix or whatever. It's not proving that we aren't, because everything we observe indicates that this is how things are. But what I'm getting at is that the system that we humans have devised for ensuring that our senses are kind of, as much as we could, put to the side and utilizing a more hard method that we call science, that seems insufficient for exploring the realm of the supernatural or the paranormal for whatever reason. And I'm trying to ask if you agree with that, or if this is indeed the disconnect where you see it in a slightly different way than I do, where I say I can't test God, and I've heard people say you can't put God in a test tube and things like this, and it's like, well, okay, but isn't that a problem? Why isn't that like an oh my goodness moment? So what do you?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'll talk to you about, because I think there's a lot of good points you bring up here, Dan. So first off, you talk about this idea that like we know that everything is, or not maybe that we know, but reality seems to be real. I think we start with like, I think therefore I am, right? And then we look at it like, it seems like reality is real. Like I think you and I would agree that the external world exists, and most of the world would agree. You get those few philosophers in the corner, we can forget about them, and a couple other people who may doubt that and say that the external world, maybe it doesn't exist, maybe I'm just a brain in Nevada or whatever. Let's just forget about them for a second.
You just inflict a bit of pain on them and they'll come around, right?
That's interesting. Oh my gosh, there's so much fun stuff. Let's just talk about, so reality is real. We just trust like the broad consensus of experiences. And here's where I wonder, okay, so we have religious experience, which, we don't have like that same like empirical basis that we would for like something that we just consistently test, like the gravity or something along these lines. But we do have a vast majority of people across all cultures through all of time really agreeing that there seems to be a God. there seems to be something more than just metaphysical naturalism. So I wonder, like, if we're just going to trust the broad consensus on like empirical on the external world, if we can just trust that, if we should at least see it as reasonable that there might be a God, and we can establish it as at least a reasonable belief. Not saying religious experience proves that God exists, because I don't think it does. I do think it makes religious belief a lot more reasonable in the same way that we can trust the external world exists because of the large consensus that the external world exists.
So this is putting into the category of testability. Then would that be fair? Then that this is something we could test in some way.
I mean, kind of. I mean, like there's different kinds of tests. Like, you know, if we're doing like a scientific test, we'll like get our microscopes out and we'll observe how particles interact. We can do like a psychology test. We'll maybe do like surveys and interviews. So I do think it's testable where we could like interview people, like, do you believe in God? Have you had experiences? Do you believe that there's miracles? But I don't think it's like the same kind of test as like looking into a microscope.
Well, you know, we could hook up our you and I, we could put on electrodes and we could measure our brain waves, and we could do an MRI and, you know, and see the whole brain as we're thinking about things and experiencing things, because that's where all the stuff happens, as far as I know, is in the brain. So we can, and Andrew Newberg, I believe, had done many things like this, documenting the religious experiences of people. And it's like, well, here's the piece of the brain that's lighting up. And then, of course, there's the what's called the God helmet, where they put this thing on people and induce magnetism, and the person will report that it's as if they experienced God.
Can I make a point right here, Dan, for a second? Do you mind?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a really interesting idea. Like Newberg, I think it's Newberg, you said his experiences, because I don't know if you listen to Apostate Prophet debate, Inspiring Philosophy, but AP makes this exact same kind of like idea where it seems like, you know, we can tap the Buddhist brain and there's the experiences that happens here, and we can tap the Christian's brain and there's these experiences in like this area of the brain. And IP brings up the point, well, like if these experiences are real, couldn't it just be that God designed us that way, that we'd have this part of this brain that would help us experience God? Like, I don't think this would really weigh any evidence against the idea of religious experience, because I think
I'm not saying that. That's not the point.
Okay, my apologies.
Yeah, no, that so we say, okay, well, this is something that not all people can, because some people just can't at all. You know, even with the God helmet and whatnot, they just, that part of their brain just doesn't activate in that way, because different brains are different. So, you know, that might pose an interesting conundrum for theists to resolve. Like, well, this, you know, and then of course I've had a person self-report that they never experienced God, but they enjoy reading the Bible and they get something out of it or whatever, but they've never had this feeling that other Christians describe, and they felt rather left out. And when I was a theist, I was left with the mystery, but you know, when I became a skeptic, I was like, there's a psychological and biological explanation for that. Simply, his brain can't do that. And so what we have is, we know that the brain can do this, granted, okay. We know we can induce this in people. We can make them feel like this is going on artificially. And so then we have this question of, unless you had this thing on 24/7, you know, this hat that would illuminate, you could never really know that it was an actual versus an artificial experience, could you?
Well, I mean, I think the same thing could be said as sort of like any sensory experience. For example, like I love eating food, and I love like the savory feeling of like maybe like a steak, right? I'm sure the same thing that could be done where maybe they could like mess with like my taste cells or whatever. They can make it feel like I'm tasting a steak, even if I'm not actually eating a steak, right? But that wouldn't make my experience of actually eating a steak and feeling that flavor any less real. It would seem like it's still a real experience. So I think the same thing could be said about like religious experience, because if we're going to kind of go like by this area where like maybe you can tap my brain and make it feel, assuming, you know, the argument from consciousness is a lot of fun to talk about. But let's just assume that like you can mess with my neurons and you can make me feel a religious experience, right? That wouldn't change the fact that maybe even if you don't mess with my neurons, I could still have these religious experiences independently of like when you're messing with like my body and such.
Right. But what I'm saying is, you know, we don't we wouldn't be able to. Let's say that I'm walking around and I have this hat on that says, now having religious experience, and the little light comes on, or there's a magnetic field and that light comes on, so I can know that it's not a giant magnet being towed by some truck that just happened to pass by, and that's what caused my religious experience. I'm like, well, that's not really the actual religious experience, because that was caused by that magnet, and instead it's self-generated. So without that, I have no way to know when it's a legitimate experience or an artificially induced experience, right?
Yeah. I think I'm getting what you're saying, but just to clarify, so like, with the idea, like I'm gonna go back to the steak, like you could mess with my taste cells and make me feel like I'm tasting the savory flavor of a steak, but I'm actually not.
Yeah.
But then I can still eat a steak and have that same sensation, right? And I'm actually experiencing
You're actually
phenomena.
now, there's a difference between, there is actually, they've made this device, or they're working on it in Japan, that you put it on your tongue and it does the different taste buds. And so it puts out salty and sour and whatever, and it can make you feel like you're tasting whatever. And they're still working on it, but that's pretty amazing. Food theory just did a thing about it, where the Willy Wonka bar will be real one day, or the one that comes on the TV, which is a bit of a stretch, but 3D printing of food is a thing. But the difference between a fake steak, where you're holding this thing against your tongue, and a real steak, there is a difference, but you, in your head, in your feelings, you can't tell unless you were able to see, I'm eating a steak versus this thing is being stuck on my tongue. If that was cut off from you for whatever reason, you might not be able to tell the difference, internally speaking. And that's what I'm saying, is that's why we would want some sort of way to verify externally that this isn't, I'm not being fooled by the machine. I'm really eating a steak. I'm not thinking that I'm eating a steak.
Right. And I think this just goes back to the idea of like, how do we know like our basic experiences are actually match up to reality? Like we have these properly basic beliefs. So I would say that we just have this properly basic belief that the external world exists, and that like when I'm eating a steak and tasting the savory flavor, I'm actually eating a steak. I can't prove it with absolute certainty. It could be the Matrix, it could be an illusion, but I do have this like properly based belief where it just makes sense, and I just believe it. I don't have proof. I have good reason, but I don't have proof. And I think the same thing could be said about these religious experiences.
But there is a difference. When you agree that there is a difference between the artificial steak and the real steak, at least from the outsider looking in. Let's say the person was blind and they couldn't, they don't know what's going on, or they're blindfolded or whatever. They don't know. It's like, is this steak or is this the fake one? Is this, maybe, and if it's a good enough, device, they wouldn't be able to tell. But we could, looking in, we see this is the real steak, this is the device. And what I'm saying is, how could he or she possibly ever know which one was the real one? They couldn't, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think you're right. To a degree, because I don't think that like a religious experience, I don't think it proves that God exists. I just think it's a good starting place.
Right.
And I think from there, like I could say I have these experiences, then let's look at the external world around me. We can look at like maybe like a cosmological argument, or like arbitrary limits, or fine tuning, or the broad amount of religious agreement within religious experiences is that there is a God, and we can look at like all these other reasons. I just think that religious experience is like a basic belief that we can kind of, from there we can look at all these other like reasons and argumentations. So I think it's just a good starting place. I don't think
I'm just trying to get to the core of where the testability of this begins or ends, because it does seem to me that if I'm just going through my daily life and all of a sudden I have some weird experience, I could attribute that to any number of things.
Sure.
Maybe it was a giant magnet being hauled by a semi-truck. Maybe it was electromagnetic disturbance. Maybe I, encountered some cocaine and didn't know, or what, and maybe a number of things, because it is different from my mundane experience. There calls out. It's a story. It's not a story of, nothing happens. That's normal. I go to sleep, I wake up, that's it. It's like you have this weird breakage of the norm, and that becomes a story, right? So what we know for sure is people can have this thing that they feel, and we also know we can generate that artificially, where there's a way to engage it to where we're fooling the brain into thinking that it's feeling this, but it's not really feeling. Well, it is, as far as the brain's concerned. And then we have this question of, well, then there's an explanation here. Either this is just something that the brain can do under certain circumstances, or because it's being interfered by things, and there's a natural way to explain that, or there isn't a natural way to explain it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how do we leap from the, we know the natural is a thing for sure, no doubt, we've agreed on that, it's real, to, well, but we can't explain it, so therefore it's got to be this?
Well, I would say that we don't know with absolute certainty that the natural is real. We got the brain in the vat. It makes a lot of sense. It's a basic belief that most people would agree on. We don't know with like 100% like absolute certainty that the like the natural world exists. You do bring up the point like about we can generate artificially again. Well, I do think that like possibility, just because something's possible doesn't mean it's probable. And I'm sure you would agree on that. Like I had a bagel with peanut butter on it for breakfast this morning. And I have pretty good reason to believe that I actually ate it. It could be that someone just tapped my brain and I saw the bagel and the peanut butter and I tasted it and I was tapped. So if we're going to doubt like these religious experiences, because the same thing can happen, I should also doubt that I ate a bagel with peanut butter this morning, and I should doubt that like I'm talking to you. I think if we're going to doubt these experiences just because they can be artificially generated, I think we'd almost have to doubt every experience we've ever had in reality, because couldn't every experience also just be like generated from like an artificial like tapping into the brain?
Right. And so yes, and that's a good argument for being a skeptic.
Yeah, well, I mean, so I think skepticism is good, but we also have to like, I think that like I don't want to bite that bullet where we're gonna have to be skeptical of literally everything
no.
existence, because I think if we're gonna follow it like what you're with the religious experience through, where just because it could be artificially generated, maybe it's not real.
No, I'm saying that the experience in and of itself is something your brain can do. I'm just saying that it's a natural phenomenon. There's nothing more to it.
Well, in these artificially generated scenarios, yeah, it's a natural phenomena, but how can we know that every religious experience, even when it's not observed, is a natural phenomena? It seems like we aren't in a position to know that. It seems like if naturalism is true, so, of course that's true, but I don't think we can get to that point without begging the question.
So if we were to examine, of course, Andrew Newberg, others have done that. Well, he's done the most, but so if we were to observe every brain, we would just see some part of the brain activate, and that wouldn't really tell us if it's natural or not natural. It's just say this person's having an experience. So how do we know it's not natural or something more to it? Wouldn't we detect some signal if it was coming from somewhere else that wasn't us? Wouldn't there be some way to demonstrate that it's not just our brain doing this?
Right. Yeah, there's a couple different directions we could go here. I just like to start with like this idea of like natural versus supernatural, because it almost seems like if I begin the way like I would think of natural, if I were like I don't know what your word is for the person that believes God does not exist, but if I'm a naturalist, right? A natural is just like anything that the only thing that can occur is a natural thing, because naturalism is true. But let's just look at it from my shoes for a perspective, like as a theist, right? I believe that God exists. So all of natural reality flows from God's existence. Like there is no natural before there's God. He's the most natural fact there is, because he'd be self-existent, just if you were to take my shoes. So all of the natural world would kind of flow through God. Then like this like natural, supernatural distinction, I don't think it would really work, because the most natural fact of all of reality would be that there's a self-existent God that created everything in this world, including you and me. So that's why like the supernatural natural distinction is kind of like, I don't really know like what's going on here, because I don't think we can get to it without really like begging the question.
Yeah. So would there be? Do you think that there would be obviously maybe we don't have it now, maybe nobody's invented it, but could there be an invention of some sort that would let us tap into or see the God realm or see the afterlife realm or whatnot?
Okay, so like I'm a Christian, I'm a theist. I believe that I'm gonna die and there'll be a second resurrection and I'll be in heaven, so I'll experience the afterlife.
Right. But I mean,
Um,
us here now, because
um,
like I
I
could
don't.
make, somebody could make a machine that would let us visualize it. There was a movie, I forget what the name of it now, but there was a movie where they proved the afterlife with this a device of some sort, and so it's like, well, if we're saying that ultimately it is natural and there isn't this supernatural natural
Mhm.
distinction, are you saying then we just simply haven't invented the way to observe it?
Well, I don't think there's a machine that can be created that we can like be like, oh, like whoa, with this machine, there's God, it's
Yeah,
done.
there you go. So,
I don't.
yeah, that'd be great.
I don't think that can be generated because God's a necessary immaterial being, and we live in a reality that's material.
Well, why
We live
not
in a
though? I
world
mean,
that's material and contingent.
why couldn't we? Like, if we could, maybe quantum tunneling or whatever the bleep it is that you want to come up with, where we could finally see the afterlife or see that there's a soul or see whatever it is, see angels or demons or whatever the bleep's going on there. Why not? I mean, couldn't we? I mean, we're pretty clever. Are we not
Mhm.
allowed to see that, or it's just impossible to see it?
So
Where are you on that?
I would say that God isn't like defining God. God is a necessary mind that creates the universe. I really like inspiring philosophy's definition. It's very simple. What kind of like in your mind, Dan? What kind of machine or whatever could be created to define the necessary mind that created the universe?
I don't even really know that a mind can exist without a brain. So I'm guessing we're looking for some sort of neural network then.
Well, I don't know if we can get there without begging the question. How do we know that a mind
What do you
can't
wait?
exist without a
What do
brain?
you think begging the question is?
It's when you kind of begging the question fallacy when you assume your conclusion and kind of like your argument.
Hmm. Okay, so what is the operating thing here where you think that that's occurring? What,
Well, I would say that like if why would we assume that only minds exist in brains or
it's
like
the
neural
only
networks?
it's the only thing that we've observed.
Well, sure, but does that mean that it's true?
It's the only thing we know of for sure.
We're getting back to like what do we know for sure? It seems like that's
Well, but
true, but
it's
we
the
don't know that
only
was
it's the only thing we know to be so far. We haven't observed any other case of a mind without a brain, have we?
Yeah, well, this is an interesting question. And it's interesting because I know you comment on a lot of my videos with like near death experiences. So there's a lot of fun there.
There's
And
testability there, but
I'm
yeah.
kind of agnostic on NDE experiences because I don't really know, but there are experiences of people who are congenitally blind. Jeffrey Long has this paper on it. It's like 7 lines of evidence for near death experiences. You can Google this if you want. But it would seem like like within this paper, one of the things he talks about is people who are blind since birth or since like very, very early in childhood, they'll have these near-death experiences and they report seeing again, which is something extremely weird, especially like under naturalism. So there's that. And I think that like with this point, we'd have to get into the argument from consciousness because I think there's like the exclusivity problem or like maybe you can tap my neurons, but how do you know actually what I know? Like you have to base that off of my
But,
reporting. There's all kinds of stuff
right,
we
but
could here.
but would you agree? We've observed that the mind, whatever that is, happens with a brain. Is that correct?
Um, kind of.
Okay.
I would
What
say like so
do you
it
have? So then the question is, do we have an example of a mind separate from a brain?
I'd say do we have an example of any other minds existing except our own?
Well,
Like
let's stick with the this question and not go off into a tangent, shall we?
so do we have examples of minds existing without brains? How do you know, Dan, that other minds exist except for besides your own?
Let's just answer the question. We'll get to side question, but let's
Mhm.
just address the question at hand. Do we have an example of minds existing outside of brains or without a brain?
I mean, near-death experiences are an interesting thing, and I haven't read enough on NDEs. But if the NDE argument fails, then I would say there's no evidence that minds, no like empirical and like scientific literature evidence that minds exist independent of brains.
Okay, great. See what I'm saying about the pulling the teeth? It's like, there, we finally got something we agree on.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, but I think
But
it's
it
important.
is.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, do you feel, when I'm asking you these questions, I've never asked this question before, do you feel cognitive dissonance?
No, I don't feel any cognitive dissonance.
Okay, so it's not like you feel like, oh, I got to defend this because it's my belief or something, like it's like a sort of like, it's just.
Well, I mean, like obviously, like I'm committed to the belief that like God exists, but I don't
Hmm,
feel like I need to defend it like to my dying breath.
hmm.
Like if I'm wrong, then I'm totally fine with admitting that I'm wrong. I think that really God does exist, and there's a lot of good reasons to believe that He does. Um, mm, but I
If
don't think. Mhm.
here's a different one. Now this is completely off topic, but I thought of it just now. If you could, let's say, press a button to stop believing in God or start believing in a different God, would you?
If it's true, I just want to believe what's true.
Ah,
I mean,
yeah, I like
all I
that.
want is what's
Yeah, yeah,
true. I mean, if
yeah. I
like,
want to push the
I,
"is it true" button. Right, exactly.
Mhm.
But yeah, there are certainly benefits either way. Like there's a benefit, if you will, to being able to question all the things, including God. Uh,
Mhm.
and that's sort of like you can do that to some point, but at some point you have to stop because you said it yourself. You're committed to this idea. Um, because you've spent a lot of energy and time on it, so certainly there's reasons to stay with it, but you want what is true, and I'm asking how we get to the truth. And so rather
Yeah,
than go on this journey, it seems like there's certain hiccups here where you're wanting to tangent, well, what about, how do we know this, or how do we know this? Like, look, let's just stay on the one thing and examine this, because I'm trying to figure out how it is, why how it is you believe what you believe, and how it is maybe how I don't believe it. And there's something going on where the thinking is different, and I'm trying to figure out what is that, why, well, not why is it, but what is it, and how do we, can we resolve that, can we have an agreement? So like, yeah, I finally got you to kind of agree, if so I have to now disprove NDEs, and then I'll have that tooth finally free. But you know um yeah, so I don't know, I guess that was a big tangent. um
yeah, you're good.
Yeah, I'm good. Um, yeah, and in my book, which a cop between an infinite home fight, and I just better have to plug my own book. I was told by somebody to do that more often.
It's your
Uh,
show, fair enough.
yeah, it's my show. I can do whatever I want.
Mhm.
Yeah. But yeah, in there I have this question of a thought experiment, and I wanted to run it by you, see what you make of it. Which is, you have to choose one. You have an afterlife, but there's no God, or you have a God, but there's no afterlife. And what do you choose, and why?
So you're saying I have these two options where there's an afterlife, but there's no God, but then,
Or there's a God, but there's no afterlife. And so that's the realities, the two realities you have to choose from. And then why would you choose the reality you
well,
choose?
I don't really know if there can be an afterlife without God. And I don't really think that there can be no God, or no, sorry, I don't think there could be an afterlife without God. So I'd probably reject that the first idea is even plausible. So then I kind of be left with like the idea of God and no afterlife. Like,
Hmm.
and my answer in overall would just be I just want to believe what's true. If God
Right,
exists,
right.
I want to follow God. If He doesn't exist, I'd be willing to become. It'd be hard, but I'd be willing to
Oh
become an
yeah.
atheist. And
Do
then,
you,
so I just want to believe what's true, and I'm just
yeah,
that's
how
like in my mind.
yeah, that's a good, maybe a good question. Is, do you think it would be difficult emotionally or intellectually to become a atheist, agnostic, skeptic, or maybe even some other religion? Like, I'll move from Christianity. I thought I was going to be a Buddhist if I lost Christianity. That didn't pan
Mhm.
out. But at any rate, Do you think that would be difficult? Do you think it would be easy? Or
Oh yeah. I think it would definitely be difficult. Like I think like deconversion or in conversion, like switching worldviews on like these deep questions is super hard. For like atheists who become Christians or Christians who become atheists or Muslims who become Christians or Christians who become Buddhists, for the vast, if it's a deeply held belief, it's really hard to switch. And I have, obviously I disagree with skeptics who have left Christianity. But I understand like conversion and deconversion is very, very hard.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I've been there. I know how difficult it was for me, but maybe other people have it easier. I mean, everyone's different. Okay, I'm trying to get my chat to prepare some questions for you. So I'll break my rules that I said that I have, which, it doesn't matter. Like you said, it's fine. I can do whatever the hell I want, I guess. Should I do the blah, 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 blah again? I should do that. Don't laugh at this. Okay. Why don't you ask me some pesky skeptics? Why don't you? Okay, my brain is gone. There it is. It went back. Okay, I got my brain and my mind in one place. Ask me some pesky questions while people prepare questions for you from chat. Ask questions, Zach. Chat.
I think there is a question right now.
Yeah, I'll get to it. Okay. You have about 5. Yeah, let's get to the chat. Let's get to the questions. He's got only 5-10 minutes left. Okay. All right. So Zach has said he think. Okay, let's see. Let's clean this up here. Zach has said he thinks there are many good reasons to believe in God. Can you provide what he thinks is the best reason? Okay.
Yeah, this is a good question. I think there's a couple of things. I think that religious experience is a good place to start when you have this broad consensus. Over time, it seems to provide rationality to the belief that God exists. But then in terms of like logical argumentation, there's a few arguments I really like. I think that contingency arguments are really good for getting to a necessary being. But then I think when you look at like the argument from arbitrary limits, I really like right now. And then the argument from consciousness is something I think is really good. So there's a few. There's a few. There's like 5-6 arguments I really like probably. So yeah, and then there's a lot that I just haven't looked into enough.
So more than one answer.
It's hard. It's like, who's your favorite kid? Well,
yeah. Somebody asked me what was the best, or what's his face? Gurr asked me last in my random chat what the best argument, and I'm like, for God was. I'm like, none of them. They all suck. They're all bad. No answer. I don't have an answer. Well, you said you have a bit more to. You got to get going here, so I'm sure that people have questions. And maybe they'll ask those in the comment section once this is an actual video, and they'll post a comment. And if they do, I'll let you know what that. If it's a question directed at you, I'll get you that, and we'll see what the answer is. Until then, they can subscribe to Zach, who's gonna totally say it's morphin time, right?
Probably not. I would say if you have questions, pushback, feel free to email me at adherentapologetics@gmail.com. I'm not good at checking YouTube comments. Dan would know that. But if you ever have questions, and Dan or anyone, feel free to push back and email me. I always get back to responding to emails. Follow me at Adherent Apologetics. Lots of fun stuff there. Yeah.
So you do the timeout. You'll do timeout because you're Zach. Zach can do timeout and can freeze time.
Timeout?
Yeah, he freezes time except for himself, and he's able to talk to the camera. No?
I don't think I have that in my abilities.
See, these are pop culture references because your name is Zach. Zach is in Power Rangers, and Zach Morris is in Saved by the Bell, and he doesn't care.
You're losing me, Dan.
All right, well, thanks for spending your time and energy with me. And yeah, promote whatever you want to promote, and then I'll hit the button, I guess.
Oh, well, thank you for giving me the opportunity. I just say follow me at Adherent Apologetics anywhere. The best way to see like my content is either to subscribe to the YouTube channel Adherent Apologetics. I'm going to be talking with an atheistic quantum physicist today at 5:30 p.m. Eastern, so that should be a lot of fun. Or the podcast Adherent Apologetics, basically the same content without the short clips. Then you can follow me on social media: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, even TikTok, and feel free to DM me or email me if you have questions. So thank you so much for having me on, Dan.
Sure thing. Glad I could be very serious during this conversation and not do anything ridiculous. Thanks for watching, everybody.